The wax-coated petals of the bridal bouquet scraped across my right cheek with enough force to split my lower lip. A warm, metallic taste flooded my mouth. The suffocating scent of crushed white roses and baby's breath filled the air between us. "Even a thief like you should know when she is not welcome," my sister sneered. Her voice rang out sharp and clear over the silent ballroom. Hundreds of guests froze in their places. Cell phones lifted into the air all around the dance floor, their camera lenses aimed straight at my bleeding lip. I was 38 years old. I served as the president of Reed Family Catering, a regional business our father built from the ground up. I negotiated massive vendor contracts and managed 60 employees. But in that moment, standing under the crystal chandeliers of Bellwether Manor, I was nothing more than the villain in Sloane's perfectly crafted wedding narrative. My mother, Judith, stepped out from the cluster of stunned bridesmaids. She did not offer me a tissue. She grabbed my wrist, her fingernails biting into my skin. "Allison, please," she whispered fiercely, her eyes darting around the room. "Do not make this worse than it already is. Just leave." Sloane jerked her arm back, preparing to strike me a second time. The sudden, violent movement dislodged a decorative pearl pin at the base of her floral arrangement. Several wraps of thick white satin ribbon unspooled from the handle. A small, flat brass object slipped free and hit the stone floor with a sharp, ringing clatter. I instinctively reached down toward the noise. "Do not touch that," the bride screamed. Her voice cracked with genuine, unfiltered panic. Every guest turned their attention from my bleeding face to her pale one. Graham Lowe, the veteran venue manager, stepped between us. He bent down with a clean white handkerchief and scooped up the piece of metal. It was a standard service key. The letters C and the number 17 were stamped directly into the brass. There was no bulky metal tag attached, just the cold, hard instrument that had been hiding perfectly flat inside the ribbon of my sister's flowers. 2 uniformed security guards approached our circle. One of them politely asked if I would consent to a search of my evening bag. I did not fall to the floor. I did not cry. I wiped the blood from my chin with a folded linen cocktail napkin and placed my velvet clutch on the nearest high-top table. "You may search it," I told the guard, keeping my voice entirely level. "But only after you initiate a formal incident report, secure the hallway security footage, and document exactly who made this public accusation against me." Sloane let out a dramatic, breathy laugh. She turned to her groom, Connor, who looked completely lost in his custom tuxedo. "Look at her acting like a lawyer, Connor. She is just trying to buy time because she knows she is caught." Graham did not join in her laughter. He pulled a digital tablet from his jacket pocket and scrolled quickly through the venue records. He looked at the brass key, then at his glowing screen, and finally at the bride. "Miss Reed," he said, using her maiden name out of habit, "our logs show you signed out the key to room C17 at 1 o'clock this afternoon." The color instantly drained from Sloane's face. She recovered in less than a second. "Someone must have stolen it from the bridal suite," she cried out, pressing a hand to her chest. "Allison was in there earlier. She must have taken it." A bridesmaid in a pale pink dress shifted nervously on her feet. "Sloane," the young woman said quietly, "when we were taking photos, I told you the pearl pin on your bouquet was crooked. I tried to fix it, but you pulled away. You refused to let anyone hold your flowers, even while you were adjusting your heavy dress." Sloane glared at her friend, silencing the girl instantly. Graham gestured down the corridor. He asked security, the bride, the groom, my mother, and me to follow him. We left the whispering crowd behind and walked in absolute silence away from the opulent reception and into the old service wing. Room C17 was tucked away in a drafty hallway near the loading dock. As we walked, the reality of the trap settled over me. Sloane had planned this perfectly. Just 2 days ago, on Thursday afternoon, I had frozen her ability to create new vendor accounts and informed her that a forensic accountant would be coming into our office on Monday morning. She needed me to look like a thief before that audit began. She needed our mother and the board of directors to doubt my integrity. Graham inserted the small brass key into the lock. The mechanism clicked loudly. He pushed the heavy wooden door inward, revealing a small windowless storage space. Stacks of silver gift boxes, silk-wrapped packages, and a large acrylic card box full of cash envelopes sat neatly on a folding table. No one cheered for my innocence. The silence in that tiny room was infinitely heavier than the screaming in the ballroom had been. My mother, the 64-year-old chair of our company board, stared at the stolen gifts with her mouth slightly open. She had just watched her youngest daughter fabricate a felony in front of 300 people. Connor stared at the acrylic card box. He turned to his new wife, his voice completely hollow. "Sloane, why are our wedding gifts locked in a service closet?" Sloane did not miss a beat. "Tara," she gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hands. "Tara is obsessed with everything being perfect. My assistant must have moved them for safekeeping. I had absolutely no idea." Graham stepped backward and pulled the door shut, locking it firmly. He instructed the security guard to stand directly in front of the handle. "No one touches anything," the venue manager stated. "We will preserve the room and the camera footage per standard venue protocol." I looked at my mother, then at Sloane. I knew this was not just about wedding gifts, but I kept my focus on the immediate procedure. "I want a copy of the incident number," I told Graham. I did not demand my sister be arrested in her white gown. I just wanted the paper trail secured. Sloane realized the small audience in the hallway was no longer under her spell. She hiked up her heavy tulle skirt, ran back down the corridor toward the main reception area, and began sobbing loudly to the first group of guests she reached, wailing that I had ruined her special day. Graham watched her run. Then his radio earpiece buzzed. He pressed a finger to his ear, listening intently to a voice from the security desk. A strange expression crossed his face. He lowered his hand and turned to me, keeping his voice barely above a whisper. "The hallway camera shows who moved the gifts. It was not you." The music in the grand ballroom had stopped playing by the time we returned from the service hallway. Hundreds of guests stood in awkward clusters around tables still heavy with untouched wedding cake and half-empty champagne flutes. No one was eating. The silence felt thick and suffocating under the vaulted ceiling. Connor walked directly to the stage and quietly asked the bandleader to cancel the bouquet toss. Judith grabbed my elbow before I could reach the exit. Her manicured fingers dug tightly into my joint as she pulled me into a quiet alcove near the coat check. "You need to make an announcement," my mother whispered, keeping her voice tight and controlled. "Tell everyone this was a massive misunderstanding. Tell them you misread a situation and panicked. We can still save your sister's reputation if you take the blame right now." I stared at the woman who had raised me. She truly believed a temporary lie could fix the permanent crack spreading through our family. "No," I said softly, pulling my arm out of her grip. "I am not lying to protect a crime." I did not march to the microphone to defend myself. I simply turned and walked back toward the venue management office, where Graham had asked the immediate family to gather. Inside the small room, the harsh fluorescent lighting made Sloane look pale and frantic. Graham turned his computer monitor toward us. He had loaded the security footage from the service corridor, complete with a bright white timestamp in the corner. The video played in silence. It showed the exact 12-minute window when the cocktail hour in the West Gallery transitioned to the main dinner reception. While guests were busy finding their seats and the staff was changing the floor plan, Tara Wynne walked into the frame. Sloane's brand assistant pushed a silver hotel cart loaded with the acrylic card box and dozens of wrapped gifts. Tara unlocked the door to room C-17, carefully stacked the items inside, and then locked the door again. She slipped the brass key into her pocket and walked calmly out of view. Sloane buried her face in Connor's shoulder and let out a loud, theatrical sob. "I knew it," the bride cried. "Tara has always been completely obsessed with my wedding. She probably planned to come back and steal everything tonight." A security guard murmured that Tara's car was already gone from the vendor parking lot. I looked closer at the paused video frame on the monitor. Something about the assistant's body language bothered me. She did not cover her face, I pointed out to the room. She used a venue cart right in the middle of a major room transition, exactly when the staff normally clears the gallery. Tara moved like a person executing an official task. Sloane snapped her head up from her husband's tuxedo jacket. Her tears stopped instantly. "Are you accusing me of lying, Allison? On my wedding day?" I did not answer her. I just asked a logical question. Who has the authority to order an assistant to move the gift table during a reception? Connor slowly stepped away from Sloane. The groom looked at the screen, then down at his new wife. He did not say a word, but the sudden physical distance between them spoke volumes. The timing of this elaborate public trap made perfect sense to me. 6 weeks earlier, in early May, I had noticed 3 separate event vendors sharing the exact same commercial mailbox address. 2 days ago, on Thursday afternoon, I had restricted Sloane's ability to create new vendor accounts in our company system. I told her that Naomi Patel, an independent forensic accountant, would begin a full corporate audit on Monday morning. My sister had simply laughed at me, sipping her sparkling water as if we were discussing the weather. She told me I could never let her have a single weekend without trying to control everything. But the panic behind her eyes had been real. She needed to destroy my credibility in front of our mother and the board of directors before Naomi opened those financial books. I refused to play her game. I did not yell at her in the venue office. I did not take out my phone to post an angry defense in our family group chat. Instead, I opened my email app and drafted a concise message to Elise Grant, our outside corporate counsel. I requested an immediate legal hold on all company communications, vendor payment logs, and Sloane's work devices. I hit send and turned my attention back to the venue manager. "Graham," I said, keeping my tone perfectly professional, "please preserve that camera footage and the key logs through your standard liability protocol." 10 minutes later, I walked out of Bellwether Manor alone. The thick Virginia humidity hit my face the moment the heavy glass doors closed behind me. Before I reached my car, my cell phone vibrated in my hand. A text message flashed across the screen from an unknown number. It was Tara. "Sloane told me to move the gifts," the first message read. "She said it was a venue security drill. I am at the diner down the highway. Please meet me." I unlocked my car door, processing the information. Tara was a terrified employee who had followed a vague order, but her silence in the ballroom had allowed my sister to humiliate me. Then a second message appeared, and the real depth of the conspiracy finally came into focus. "I still have her original messages," Tara wrote, "and one of them mentions your catering van." I did not meet Tara at the roadside diner. We sat in the glass-walled conference room of Elise Grant's downtown law firm early Monday morning. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady note against the heavy silence. The young assistant pushed her smartphone across the polished mahogany table. She explained how Sloane had framed the request at the reception. The bride claimed the venue required all gift boxes cleared before dinner service began. Tara had moved the heavy acrylic box right as the crowd shifted rooms, assuming she was executing a standard security protocol. Elise connected the device to a secure laptop to extract the digital data and its underlying metadata. Tara stared at her own twisting hands. She whispered that she had stayed silent during the ballroom confrontation because my mother and sister possessed enough industry influence to destroy her career. I offered no comforting words in return. Her fear made sense, but her silence had almost cost me my livelihood. The extracted message chain told a complete and damning story. Elise pulled up the formatted transcript on the large wall monitor. Sloane's instructions were precise and calculated. "Move the gifts to room C17. Do not tell Connor. Wait for the signal." The final message chilled the room. Sloane had ordered her assistant to take a handful of cash envelopes and place them directly inside my catering van right after venue security finished searching my purse. Tara never executed that final step because the brass key fell out of the bouquet too soon. The trap had snapped shut before the bait was fully placed. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a faded manila folder. I slid it across the smooth table toward Elise. Inside rested a single sheet of paper from August of the previous year. It was the physical proof of my biggest failure as a corporate president. 10 months earlier, I had caught my sister using our company credit card to pay a commercial photographer for her failing private event studio. The charge was $8,000. I confronted her immediately, forcing her to sign a promissory note acknowledging the theft. My mother had wept in my office that afternoon. Judith insisted an official board report would permanently ruin Sloane's future and shame my late father's memory, so I buried the document in my personal files. I fixed the problem quietly and taught my sister a terrible lesson about accountability. Now, sitting in the law firm, I watched Elise read the paper. The seasoned attorney looked up, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. The document proved Sloan knew company funds were not her personal allowance, and it demonstrated clear intent. But it also proved I had deliberately bypassed board oversight. I nodded slowly, accepting the reality that the independent directors might discipline me. The truth required all the pieces, even the ones that compromised my own standing. The sudden vibration of my phone broke the quiet of the conference room. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I answered on speakerphone so Elise could document the conversation. Judith did not bother greeting me. She immediately declared Tara a liar who was trying to save her own skin. My mother threatened to convene an emergency board meeting to suspend my presidential authority if I continued this investigation. Her voice dropped into that familiar, pleading cadence she always used when she wanted me to carry the weight of the family. "You are stronger than your sister, Allison," she said, perfectly playing her role. "Why can you not just let this go?" I looked at the printed text messages, detailing the plan to plant stolen cash in my vehicle. Because strength is not permission to use me. I ended the call without waiting for her reply. A second call came through less than 10 minutes later. Naomi Patel, our forensic accountant, was already deep into the corporate server logs back at the main office. Her voice lacked its usual professional warmth. Naomi had pulled the creation history for a vendor named Brightwell Linen. The electronic footprint traced directly back to Sloan's user account. Naomi explained the money trail with clinical precision. Our company bank statements showed multiple payments flowing to Brightwell Linen over the past year. The receiving account shared the exact same routing and reference numbers as a bank account that had once refunded a deposit from Sloan's bankrupt private studio back to Reed Family Catering. The closed loop was undeniable. The wedding sabotage was just a smokescreen to hide a massive, ongoing financial bleed. Naomi paused before she said it. "Allison, Brightwell was not paid $8,000. It was paid more than $90,000. Naomi stood in front of the whiteboard in the law firm's secondary meeting room. The forensic accountant uncapped a black dry erase marker, and the sharp squeak against the porcelain surface cut through my lingering shock over the $90,000 figure. She drew 3 distinct boxes across the top of the board. Brightwell Linen, Rosemont Rentals, Harbor Event Media. Beside each name, she listed a string of outgoing company payments, establishing a pattern that stretched back 18 months. Every single invoice sat carefully beneath the $10,000 threshold, perfectly calculated to bypass secondary departmental approval. The services were described in vague industry terminology, seamlessly blended into the master budgets for our massive corporate events. My throat went dry. I pressed my palms flat against the mahogany table, studying my own looping signature at the bottom of the printed master budgets spread before me. I had signed off on the total event costs without scrutinizing the individual subcontractors, trusting the system I had built. That trust had cost my employees hundreds of thousands of dollars. Naomi tapped the whiteboard with her marker. Public records showed all 3 vendors shared a single commercial mailbox at a strip mall across town. We did not need to hire private investigators or breach any personal accounts. The company bank statements and public business registries provided every piece of the puzzle. A legitimate supplier in our network had already confirmed they never subcontracted any equipment to those 3 entities. My sister had attempted to cover her tracks, but her panic made her sloppy. Following my Thursday warning about the impending audit, someone had logged into the accounting software and systematically deleted dozens of payment records. A specific memory surfaced from a staff meeting the previous year. Sloan leaning against the conference room doorframe, rolling her eyes, loudly complaining that my insistence on using immutable audit trail software was just another symptom of my obsessive control issues. That rigid software had quietly recorded the creator, the exact time of modification, and the target bank accounts for every deleted file. The digital footprints walked straight back to her workstation. Elise Grant leaned forward in her leather chair and pointed a manicured finger at a separate stack of invoices. A cluster of rush payments carried my mother's electronic authorization. When questioned over a brief, tense conference call earlier that morning, Judith claimed Sloan had simply categorized them as emergency linen replacements and last-minute social media marketing packages. Yet the chairwoman of the board adamantly refused Elise's request to surrender her personal mobile device for a routine data review. The refusal hung heavy in the air. The boundary between my mother's willful ignorance and active complicity began to blur, and a new wave of exhaustion settled over my shoulders. Naomi switched to a red marker, drawing my attention back to the board. She drafted a thick line connecting Harbor Event Media to a final wire transfer executed just 2 days before the wedding ceremony. The recipient was not a rental company or a linen supplier. The recipient was Bellwether Manor. The transfer amount was exactly $38,000. The heavy glass door to the conference room swung open before anyone could speak. Connor stood in the threshold, wearing a wrinkled dress shirt and carrying a thick leather portfolio. The groom did not look like a man enjoying his honeymoon. Elise had requested his presence to verify the venue contracts he had personally signed, and he took a slow, deliberate breath before stepping inside. He placed his smartphone face up on the table, pushing it toward the attorney. He explained how he had confronted his new wife about the final venue invoice just hours ago. Sloan swore our mother had quietly gifted them the remaining balance to ensure a perfect day. Connor knew Judith had specifically capped her financial contribution at the rehearsal dinner, so he searched through his own email archives. He pulled up the venue's final payment confirmation receipt. The reference line on the digital receipt clearly listed Harbor Event Media. The truth sat right there on the whiteboard, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights of the legal office. The lavish, opulent party my sister used to publicly brand me a thief had been financed entirely by the money she bled from our family business. She had bought her perfect day with the payroll security of 60 hardworking employees, and she had planned to let me take the fall for it. Connor stared at the red lines connecting the fake vendors to his wedding venue. He turned his attention to the printed company bank statements spread across the table, his posture rigid and his breathing shallow. His voice lacked any trace of anger, carrying only a hollow, devastating clarity. "What else did my wife buy with your company's money?" Connor's devastating question hung in the stale air of the legal conference room, unanswered. Naomi did not have a complete inventory of the stolen corporate funds yet, but my sister provided her own twisted justification the very next morning. Sloan initiated a scorched earth campaign. A mass email landed in the inboxes of our extended relatives and 30 senior employees just before dawn. The subject line read, "The truth about the wedding." Reading the lengthy paragraphs felt like swallowing crushed glass. The bride claimed I had fabricated the entire vendor crisis out of bitter jealousy, framing Tara as a rogue thief to cover my own tracks. According to the message, my ultimate goal was to exploit a ruined wedding reception to steal her legitimate share of our father's legacy. My mother was copied on the correspondence. The chairwoman offered zero public rebuttal to the staff, essentially giving the lies her silent blessing. Connor forwarded a different set of messages to our legal counsel that same afternoon. The groom had returned to their shared apartment to pack a travel bag, demanding immediate answers about the venue payments and her hidden studio debts. Sloan never denied taking the cash. She simply rebranded the theft. Her texts framed the stolen hundreds of thousands as an informal advance on her corporate equity, insisting I had implicitly agreed to the arrangement. To prove her point, she sent her husband a photograph of the $8,000 promissory note from the previous year. She used my past mercy as a weapon, arguing that our family always handled these minor financial matters internally. The corporate fallout escalated rapidly. By Wednesday afternoon, I sat across from Martin Hale and Valerie Cho in the main executive boardroom. Our independent directors reviewed the old promissory note with clinical detachment. The polished oak table separating us had never felt so vast. Martin folded his hands over the physical document, asking point blank why the initial credit card violation had never been reported to the governing body. I did not offer excuses. I did not hide behind my mother's tears from the previous year, nor did I try to minimize the damage. Looking directly at the former banking executive, I admitted I had chosen to conceal the infraction to protect my sibling, and that specific failure of leadership had paved the way for the current financial crisis. My honesty earned me no leniency. The board immediately voted to hand Elise and Naomi full, unrestricted authority over the fraud investigation. Furthermore, I was officially stripped of my power to decide any disciplinary action regarding the director of brand partnerships. Martin pulled the master audit file toward his side of the table, and he did not ask for my permission to take it. This small, deliberate gesture finalized the transfer of power. Walking out of that boardroom, the real-world consequences of my silence were waiting in the hallway. A major pharmaceutical client had just called our sales director, placing their massive annual banquet contract on an indefinite hold due to industry rumors of an internal fraud probe. Two of our most reliable wholesale food suppliers suddenly demanded strict cash-on-delivery terms, refusing to extend our standard 30-day credit window. The employee break room buzzed with terrified whispers about missing paychecks and imminent layoffs. I immediately authorized a massive withdrawal from our legal contingency reserves to guarantee the upcoming payroll cycle, ensuring no worker missed a single dime of their wages. Knowing my own past cowardice had magnified their current jeopardy tasted like ash in my mouth. The scent of expensive floral perfume invaded my private office the next morning before the door even opened. Judith bypassed the receptionist and marched directly toward my desk. The chairwoman looked exhausted, her perfect posture finally giving way to gravity. She slumped into the leather guest chair and admitted the scattered pieces she actually knew. My mother confessed she was aware of the crushing studio debt, and she acknowledged signing a handful of those vague invoices to help her youngest daughter stay afloat. She swore she knew absolutely nothing about the fake vendor network or the elaborate plan to frame me at the reception. "We can still fix this," the older woman pleaded, reaching her manicured hands across the desk. "Convert the missing funds into a formal shareholder loan. Save your sister, Allison. Keep this family intact." I looked at the wrinkled hands resting on my leather desk pad. "Our employees are terrified about losing their mortgages, and you want me to use their operating budget as a personal bailout fund for a criminal." I pulled my own hands back, refusing the physical contact. The family does not get to steal from the staff. Hours later, I sat back down in the downtown law firm with Elise. The attorney had finished reviewing the massive text message export Connor had provided from his final argument with his bride. One specific exchange highlighted a dangerous detachment from reality. Sloane had texted her husband a furious rant, claiming she rightfully owned 40% of the catering empire, despite her actual economic shares topping out at exactly 20. But it was the next message in the chain that made the experienced corporate lawyer sit up straight and reach for her reading glasses. Elise turned her laptop screen toward me, tapping a fingernail against a blue text bubble sent at 2 a.m. "Do not worry about the accounting," the digital message read. "Allison always fixes the paperwork after the fact." The words sat there on the bright screen, exposing the core delusion that drove this entire disaster. Sloane did not view me as an innocent victim or a naive fool. She firmly believed I was the ultimate enabler. The bride was entirely convinced that her older sister would eventually bend the corporate rules and forge the documents to transform her felonies into legitimate corporate accounting, just as soon as the public anger passed. Elise leaned back in her heavy leather chair, a slow, calculated realization settling over her features. The lawyer steepled her fingers together, her voice dropping into a register of pure strategic focus. "We do not need to trick her," Elise told me, tapping the glowing screen one last time. "We need to give her one formal chance to explain, and let her assume you are still the exact same sister." The laser printer in the corner of the legal conference room hummed to life, spitting out 3 crisp sheets of heavy bond paper. The scent of warm toner drifted across the mahogany table. Elise Grant collected the pages, tapped their edges against the polished wood to align them perfectly, and slid the stack toward my chair. It was the formal notice of an internal corporate investigation. The black ink outlined the strict parameters of the upcoming interview, explicitly stating that the session would be recorded and monitored by company representatives. The document offered no promise of immunity, contained no guarantee against termination, and certainly made no mention of converting stolen corporate funds into a personal family loan. A junior associate sitting next to Elise shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. He cleared his throat and suggested an alternative approach. The young lawyer proposed that I play the role of the forgiving older sibling, advising me to smile and offer fake sympathy to lower my sister's guard. If I made her believe I was going to cover the missing money, he argued, she would confess to everything on tape much faster. I felt a sudden, sharp ache in my jaw. I had spent my entire adult life watching my family manipulate each other with empty promises, and I refused to bring that exact same poison into this room. No, I told the associate, keeping my voice flat and completely devoid of warmth. I will not speak a single word that I do not intend to honor. There will be no acting, and there will be no fake amnesty. Elise held up a hand, silencing her junior colleague before he could argue the strategy. The seasoned corporate attorney looked at me with a steady, calculating gaze, completely understanding the boundary I had just drawn in the sand. She reached out and tapped a manicured fingernail against the top page of the notice. "Then we stick to the absolute, undeniable truth," Elise explained, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. "You will simply state that the board of directors cannot even begin to review any repayment proposal until they understand the full, documented scope of the missing funds. That is a factual statement. It implies a process, but it promises absolutely nothing about the final outcome." The strategy required me to offer a blank canvas and let the director of brand partnerships paint her own masterpiece of delusion. The resistance began the very next morning. The heavy oak door of my executive office swung open without a preliminary knock, hitting the rubber wall stop with a loud thud. Judith marched into the room, bringing the suffocating scent of expensive floral perfume and pure, unadulterated panic with her. My mother wore a stiff navy suit, her posture rigid as she closed the door behind her and leaned heavily against the wood. She demanded that I cancel the scheduled legal interview immediately. The chairwoman wanted to host a closed-door family meeting in her private dining room, without any attorneys present, and definitely without any recording devices running. She promised we could sort out the missing thousands over a pot of coffee, just like we always did. I did not stand up from my desk. I simply looked at the woman who had spent decades prioritizing the illusion of a perfect family over actual reality. "Unrecorded family meetings in your dining room are the exact reason our company is currently bleeding hundreds of thousands of dollars," I replied, organizing a stack of vendor files. "The independent directors have already mandated this formal process." The time for private coffee conversations expired the moment she tried to frame me for a felony in front of 300 wedding guests. Judith stepped away from the door, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the back of a leather guest chair. The older woman deployed her final, desperate weapon. She warned me that if I forced her youngest child into a legal interrogation, the bride would never forgive me for the betrayal. I stopped organizing the files. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, feeling a strange, profound sense of quiet settle in the center of my chest. The heavy burden of keeping everyone happy suddenly felt completely irrelevant. "My decisions," I said softly, "are no longer built around whether or not she will forgive me." 4 days later, during the first week of July, the humid Virginia heat baked the asphalt outside the downtown law firm. Inside the main conference room, the climate control was set to a sharp, aggressive chill. Elise and Naomi had spent the previous hour staging the environment. The massive cardboard boxes filled with authentic bank statements, fake vendor invoices, and recovered audit logs were deliberately hidden away in an adjoining room. When I took my seat at the center of the long table, only a single thin manila folder rested on the polished wood in front of me. Sloane walked through the double glass doors at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I would learn later from outside counsel that she had flatly refused to hire her own defense attorney, firmly believing that securing legal representation would only make her look guilty to Connor. Her new husband was already demanding answers about their finances, and she needed to keep him as far away from this corporate disaster as possible. She did not enter the room looking like a woman facing ruin. She dressed for a victory lap. The bride wore a perfectly tailored linen dress, her hair blown out into loose, expensive waves. She carried a slim leather portfolio under one arm, and she moved with the breezy confidence of a junior executive arriving to pitch a minor budget adjustment. She completely ignored Elise, pulling out a chair directly across from me and crossing her legs. Sloane placed her portfolio on the table and slid a few typed pages toward the center. It was a flimsy, poorly formatted repayment proposal. She was treating this entire investigation like a standard bank loan negotiation, completely blind to the fact that she was sitting inside a trap of her own making. Elise did not acknowledge the proposal. The attorney slid the internal investigation notice and a separate consent to record document across the table. In a clear, practiced voice, Elise read the legal conditions aloud. She informed the younger woman that she had the absolute right to postpone the meeting to consult outside counsel, and she reiterated that the digital audio recorder sitting in the center of the table was about to be activated. Sloane picked up the expensive metal pen provided by the firm. She did not bother reading the fine print on the legal documents. She simply signed her name with a practiced flourish, the sharp scratch of the nib echoing in the quiet room. She pushed the papers back toward the lawyer and offered a small, patronizing sigh. "I have absolutely nothing to hide," Sloane announced, folding her hands neatly in her lap. She looked past the attorney and locked eyes with me, a familiar, challenging smirk appearing on her face. "Are we really doing all of this corporate theater over a few minor accounting mistakes, Allison? Are you actually trying to destroy me over a misunderstanding?" No one had tricked her. She had read the warnings, signed the consent forms, and voluntarily walked into a monitored legal interview because she believed her own entitlement would shield her from any real consequences. I reached out and pressed the red button on the digital audio recorder. A small light blinked to life, capturing the silence in the room. I did not take her bait. I did not raise my voice or defend my actions. I simply opened the thin manila folder resting in front of me and pulled out the single sheet of paper resting on top. "Let us start with the incident in room C17, I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured. Sloane rolled her eyes, leaning back in her chair. She repeated the exact same lie she had fed to her terrified assistant, claiming the entire situation was just a routine venue security drill that Tara had completely misunderstood. I did not argue with her assessment. I slowly turned the printed piece of paper around and slid it across the mahogany table until it stopped right next to her flimsy repayment proposal. The document displayed the complete time-stamped text message chain, extracted directly from Tara's cellular phone. Sloane looked down at the paper, and the patronizing smirk finally melted right off her face. "If this was only a security drill," I asked, watching her eyes dart desperately across her own printed words, "why did you order your assistant to put the stolen wedding envelopes into my catering van?" The digital audio recorder resting on the center of the mahogany table continued to blink a steady, rhythmic red light. Sloane stared down at the printed transcript of her own text messages, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the leather portfolio. For nearly 10 seconds, no one spoke. The chill from the office air conditioning seemed to drop another few degrees. Tara panicked, my sister finally muttered, her voice losing its initial breezy confidence. She tried to pull the portfolio closer to her chest. She misunderstood the timeline. I never told her to put anything in your vehicle. Elise Grant did not raise her voice. The attorney simply slid a second document from her own file folder. It was a clean, formatted printout showing the creation logs and routing numbers for 3 corporate accounts. "We are not talking about Tara right now," Elise said, her tone clinical and precise. "Let us talk about Brightwell Linen, Rosemont Rentals, and Harbor Event Media. Do you recognize those corporate names, Sloane?" Sloane snapped her gaze upward, her chin lifting in a familiar defensive posture. She denied owning the accounts, insisting she only recommended them because they offered superior event packages at competitive market rates. I did not jump across the table or raise my voice in anger. I simply waited, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable for her. "If those were legitimate vendors offering market rates," I asked, keeping my delivery completely flat, "why did you split every single invoice so that each transaction stayed safely beneath $10,000? My sister shifted in her chair, her eyes darting toward the closed door of the adjoining room where Naomi Patel and the independent board members were listening through the live audio feed. She tried a different tactic, banking on her lifelong belief that she held a special, untouchable status within the family enterprise. "I took what rightfully belonged to me," Sloane snapped, her mask of innocence slipping completely away. "Dad built Reed Family Catering for both of us. You get to sit in the corner office and play president while I pull in all the brand partnerships for pennies. I only took my share." The raw, unfiltered entitlement hung in the air, captured permanently by the spinning digital recorder. Creating fake shell companies and routing corporate funds through commercial mailboxes is not taking a salary, I pointed out, leaning forward slightly. "That is corporate embezzlement." Sloane scoffed, waving a hand dismissively as if we were arguing over a seating chart. She demanded that the board review her informal repayment proposal, insisting she had brought a fair solution to the table. "We cannot review a proposal," I replied, "until we know the exact total." "How much did you take from the company, Sloan?" She hesitated, her jaw tightening as she realized the trap she had walked into. She looked at Elise, then back at me, calculating how much we already knew from the forensic audit. Realizing the immutable software logs had already mapped out every transaction, she finally surrendered the number. $284,000, she muttered, the total slipping from her lips like an admission of a minor parking violation. The confession triggered a cascade of admissions. She admitted to fabricating the fake vendor invoices to pay off her failed private studio debts, her mounting credit card balances, and the final payment for her luxury wedding venue. She admitted she staged the entire public accusation at Bellwether Manor because she needed to destroy my credibility before Naomi opened the audit books on Monday morning. She even admitted our mother only knew about a small fraction of the debt and had zero knowledge of the criminal conspiracy to frame me. She believed that by laying out the numbers herself, she was once again taking control of the narrative. Sloan shoved her flimsy repayment proposal across the polished wood, pushing it right up against my manila folder. She leaned across the table, her eyes wide with a desperate, misplaced kind of trust. "You fixed the first charge for me," Sloan pleaded, her voice dropping into a soft, wheedling tone from our childhood. "Fix this one, and I will never touch company money again." I stared at her across the table. "Are you formally asking the board to convert your fake vendor accounts, your embezzlement, and your criminal frame job into a family loan?" "Yes," she whispered, completely convinced she had finally found the magic words. "Just get the paperwork right, Allison, like you always do." Elise Grant reached out and pressed the stop button on the digital audio recorder. The red light blinked out. The heavy oak door connecting our conference room to the adjoining office swung open smoothly. Martin Hale, Valerie Cho, and Naomi Patel walked into the room one by one. Martin looked down at my sister with a cold, absolute professionalism. "Your corporate access to Reed Family Catering," the former banker announced, his voice echoing in the quiet space, "is officially terminated, effective immediately." Sloan froze in her chair, the color draining entirely from her face as she looked from the board members back to me. She realized she had not negotiated a bailout. She had just handed us the confession that would destroy her entirely. "You promised to help me," Sloan choked out, staring directly into my eyes. I closed my manila folder, picked up my pen, and looked back at her without a trace of pity or malice. "No," I said quietly. "I promised to listen." Elise placed a steady hand over the printed transcript of the confession, looking up at the independent directors. "Now the board has to decide what happens to this recording." The emergency board meeting was convened in the executive conference room less than 3 hours after the recorded interview ended. The afternoon sun beat down against the tinted glass windows, casting long, stark shadows across the mahogany table where my fellow directors sat in tense silence. Elise Grant stood at the head of the room, outlining the preliminary forensic audit findings, the physical venue evidence recovered from Bellwether Manor, and the authenticated audio confession. When the formal motion to terminate my sister's corporate employment for just cause was brought to the floor, I immediately exercised my legal right to recuse myself from the vote. My mother glared at me from across the table. When Martin Hale called for the votes, Judith raised her hand and voted against termination, attempting to use her remaining influence to shield her youngest child. But her single vote was entirely powerless against the 2 independent directors. Martin and Valerie Cho voted solidly together, officially stripping the director of brand partnerships of her title, her access, and her career. The board did not stop at terminating employment. Moving swiftly through a separate agenda item, the independent directors initiated a formal internal review of Judith's own financial approvals, focusing heavily on the rushed invoices she had signed without verifying proper documentation. Within minutes, the chairwoman was stripped of her financial sign-off privileges. Before the meeting adjourned, the board formally requested that she step down from her position as chairwoman while a comprehensive external governance review was conducted. Judith slammed her palms flat against the wood, her voice shaking with bitter indignation as she looked at me. "You let strangers walk into your father's company and tear this family apart," she whispered, her eyes burning with resentment. Father appointed independent directors, precisely because he knew the family needed people who were not afraid to enforce the rules, I replied, my voice steady and unyielding. While the corporate machinery dismantled my sister's illusions of immunity, her personal life imploded with equal velocity. Connor had spent the afternoon reviewing the encrypted chat logs and financial statements forwarded by our legal team. He did not stage a dramatic confrontation at the corporate office. Instead, he returned to their upscale apartment while his wife was still dealing with the board's decision, packed 2 large suitcases, and left them by the front door. When Sloane returned home expecting comfort, her husband met her in the hallway. He told her plainly that what ended their marriage was not just the staggering financial theft or the hidden studio debts. It was the cold, calculated cruelty of fabricating a criminal charge against her own older sister, just to keep her wealthy groom from discovering the truth. Connor walked out of the apartment that evening, checked into a local extended-stay hotel, and immediately retained a divorce attorney. Desperate and completely isolated, Sloane drove straight to our mother's house after dark. She begged Judith to tap into her personal liquid assets to cover the missing $284,000 before the company filed formal police reports. Standing in the familiar high-ceilinged foyer where we had grown up, my mother finally confronted the hard math of reality. She pulled up her investment accounts and realized her total liquid assets fell tens of thousands of dollars short of the deficit. Judith frantically dialed my cell phone, but I let it ring straight to voicemail. For the first time in her life, my sister sat in a room where absolutely no one possessed the means or the willingness to bail her out. The corporate response proceeded with cold, mechanical precision. The board formally approved a civil recovery lawsuit against Sloane, filed notice with our Fidelity insurance carrier, and authorized outside counsel to transfer the entire audit package and the recorded confession to public law enforcement authorities. Elise made sure to explain to me that turning the files over to investigators did not guarantee an immediate physical arrest or a swift judicial outcome. The wheels of public justice operated on a timeline completely separate from corporate boardrooms. The following morning, Judith intercepted me in the building lobby as I arrived for work. She cornered me near the elevator banks, begging me one last time to call off the lawyers and simply reclassify the entire catastrophe as an informal shareholder advance. "She is facing criminal prosecution, Allison," my mother pleaded, tears pooling in her eyes. "Can you not just call them and tell them it was all a terrible mistake? The confession, the fake vendor network, and the attempt to frame me for a felony mean this was never a good faith loan," I answered, stepping past her toward the elevator doors. I told her I would not finance a high-priced criminal defense attorney for my sister, nor would I exert any pressure on our employees to retract their truthful statements to investigators. The elevator doors slid open, cutting off her response. Before I could step inside, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was Elise calling from the downtown office with a grim update. "The investigative detectives just reviewed the transfer package," Elise told me, her voice tight over the line. "They want to bring you in for an initial witness interview first. And Sloane's newly appointed defense attorney is already filing motions to suppress the audio recording, claiming your sister's confession was coerced." Nearly 11 months after the wedding, the heavy oak doors of the county courthouse creaked open to let in the bright afternoon glare of May of the year 2026. The investigation had stretched across the remainder of the previous year and deep into the following spring, moving with a slow, deliberate gravity that completely ignored our corporate timelines. Reed Family Catering had survived the financial bleeding, but we operated at a significantly reduced capacity, having lost several major accounts, while rebuilding our market reputation from the ground up. Inside the courtroom, defense counsel immediately launched a fierce assault on the digital audio recording we had secured the previous summer. The attorney argued that my presence in the room, combined with my family relationship to the accused, rendered the entire interview coercive and unfair. Elise Grant did not flinch under the verbal attack. Our outside counsel calmly presented the written interview notice, the signed consent form, and the complete, unedited audio file from beginning to end. The full recording demonstrated clearly that no promises of immunity were ever made, and that my tone remained strictly professional throughout the proceeding. When the defense attempted to suggest that the sisters had always treated company funds as casual family loans, Elise introduced the physical promissory note from August of the year 2024. The defense attorney tried to spin the document as proof of a pre-existing informal lending arrangement. I took the witness stand, sitting upright in the wooden chair, and publicly acknowledged my own failure of governance for handling that initial $8,000 infraction internally, rather than reporting it immediately. My admission did not break our legal case. By owning my past mistake on the record, the judge and prosecutors recognized that I was not sanitizing history to frame my sibling. The signed paper clearly categorized the transaction as personal misuse of company funds with mandatory restitution, establishing conclusively that the younger sister knew the strict corporate rules long before she began her systematic embezzlement. A parade of independent witnesses followed me to the stand. Tara testified about the vague text instructions she received and her shock upon discovering the plan to plant cash envelopes inside my vehicle. Graham Lowe established the rigid chain of custody for the venue key logs and hallway surveillance footage. Naomi Patel walked the court through the immutable software audit logs and the complex network of fake vendor accounts. Connor testified about his ex-wife's hidden debts, her false claims regarding corporate ownership, and her explicit written expectations that her older sister would eventually doctor the paperwork to save her. Faced with an overwhelming wall of digital and physical evidence, the defense ultimately abandoned its trial strategy. Prior to the formal sentencing phase, my sister agreed to plead guilty to one felony count of grand larceny embezzlement and one related count of corporate fraud. The presiding judge handed down a sentence that balanced the severity of the white-collar crime with the realities of our state penal guidelines. The court ordered a term of 18 months of actual incarceration in a regional correctional facility, followed by several years of supervised release. The judgment mandated full financial restitution totaling $284,000, permanently barred her from holding any corporate fiduciary position, and established a civil asset recovery order, ensuring that any future financial distribution from her remaining economic share in Reed Family Catering would be automatically intercepted and applied directly to her outstanding debt. Judgment. As the bailiff prepared to lead her away in a gray jumpsuit, my sister turned her head and locked eyes with me across the courtroom aisle. "Was destroying me really worth it?" she whispered, her voice cracking with bitterness. I stood by the wooden bench, keeping my posture entirely level. "I gave you a way to tell the truth," I answered softly. "You used it to ask me to lie again." I did not ask the judge for the maximum possible prison sentence, nor did I join the prosecutors in pushing for harsher terms. I simply stepped back and let the public legal system finish the work I had started. When the guards escorted her through the side exit, I turned my attention toward Naomi and the company staff members who had come to support the business. Stepping out onto the front stone steps of the courthouse into the warm May air, my mother intercepted me near the parking curb. Judith crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her expression hardened by months of resentment. "She is paying for her mistakes behind bars right now," my mother demanded, her voice shaking with quiet fury. "How much longer are you going to punish this family?" The heavy summer heat of July of the year 2026 pressed against the tall glass windows of my office, turning the afternoon air thick and still. More than a full year had passed since the chaotic wedding reception at Bellwether Manor, and roughly 2 months had ticked quietly by since the final sentencing hearing brought our legal battle to a formal close. Reed Family Catering still stood proudly in the historic downtown district, but the business carried a smaller, leaner footprint. Insurance payouts and civil asset recoveries had covered only a fraction of our losses, meaning the company continued to absorb the true financial cost of the embezzlement over the long term. I had fundamentally changed the way I managed daily operations to ensure nothing like this could ever happen again. During our midsummer company meeting, I stood before our remaining 50 employees and addressed my past mistakes without evasion or excuse. I openly admitted that I had concealed my sister's initial financial infraction years earlier, and that my silence had ultimately placed everyone in the room at serious risk. I did not ask for their immediate forgiveness, knowing trust had to be earned back through consistent actions rather than empty words. Instead, I introduced a series of permanent structural safeguards, including mandatory dual approvals for all financial transactions, strict vendor verification protocols, anonymous reporting channels, and independent quarterly audits. To reinforce those new boundaries, I officially surrendered direct control over vendor onboarding to our newly appointed Chief Financial Officer. Handing over a heavy set of administrative office keys to another executive felt entirely foreign at first, but the physical gesture reminded me that true leadership did not require carrying every single operational burden alone. Being strong no longer meant acting as a shield for people who refused to protect themselves. My relationships with the other secondary players in this corporate tragedy settled into permanent, clearly defined distances. Tara cooperated fully with the internal investigation and legal teams, and while she could not be reinstated to her former position due to her initial silence, I provided her with an honest, balanced reference letter to help her secure a fresh start elsewhere. Connor finalized his divorce through separate legal counsel, and any necessary administrative communication regarding corporate gift checks or shared assets was handled strictly through our respective attorneys. No romantic resolutions bloomed from the wreckage, and I preferred the quiet stability of that clean break. My mother struggled intensely to accept her diminished standing within the family and the company. Stripped of her board chairmanship and required by the independent directors to complete private counseling, Judith requested permission to return to the business in an honorary advisory capacity. I denied the request completely. I gently explained that while a mother-daughter relationship could slowly heal over time, corporate financial access was never meant to serve as proof of emotional affection. When she asked if I had finally found it in my heart to forgive my imprisoned sister, my response drew a sharp line between personal feelings and operational reality. Forgiveness remained an internal emotional journey, I told her, while criminal sentences, financial restitution, and firm personal boundaries belonged entirely to the realm of law and accountability. The mail carrier dropped a thick manila envelope onto my wooden desk on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The return address indicated it came directly through the court-administered Civil Restitution Division. Inside rested a single company check representing my sister's very first mandatory restitution payment. The numerical amount was remarkably small, falling impossibly short of replacing everything she had systematically stolen over 18 months. There was no handwritten note of remorse tucked inside the envelope, no tearful apology, and no plea for understanding. I picked up the check, walked out of my private office, and handed the paper directly to our finance department to be deposited straight into our Employee Recovery Reserve Fund. I did not send the money back out of misplaced guilt, and I did not let the small sum reopen old wounds. Standing by the window of the conference room, I thought back to the glittering chandeliers of Bellwether Manor and the cold piece of metal that had slid across the stone floor. That flying bouquet had exposed much more than a hidden room full of stolen gift boxes. It had shattered the exhausting role I had voluntarily played for decades, forcing me to stop cleaning up messes I did not create. The first payment was small, and it certainly did not repair everything she had taken. But for the first time in my life, I did not send it back. I was not holding my family together anymore. I was finally refusing to let them pull me apart. When you spend your whole life acting as the shock absorber for everyone else's mistakes, you eventually realize that catching people when they fall is not always an act of love. Sometimes, it is just the thing that keeps them walking down a destructive path. We often believe that loyalty means covering up the cracks, smoothing over the messy truths, and protecting family members from the heavy weight of their own terrible choices. But true protection does not mean letting someone destroy the lives of innocent people just to keep up appearances. You cannot love someone out of entitlement. And you certainly cannot fix a broken moral compass by redrawing the paperwork behind their back. When you hide a family member's first theft, you are not saving them. You are only teaching them that rules are flexible and that someone else will always pay the price for their comfort. Boundaries are not built to punish the people we love, but to protect our own integrity and the well-being of those who depend on us to be honest. Letting go of the false responsibility to fix every family catastrophe is terrifying, but it is the only way to stop carrying a burden that was never yours to bear in the first place. Have you ever found yourself covering for someone's mistakes just to keep the peace, only to realize you were helping them cause even more harm? And how did you finally decide to put down that heavy weight?